Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I've already gotten a little bit of a jump start on today's work by taking off all the cardboard and paper coverings and giving myself access to the top surface of this bin just to see how things are progressing. You can also see I've got my glove over there still, so I haven't gotten into it. I've also got my camera there that we're going to use to film the time lapse after we're done working here, because in this bin we've always noticed that after we disrupt the material that the worms inhabit, the worms just go ballistic. They start running all over the surface. They try climbing up the walls. And it's anticipated that after we do this check-in today, we're going to get the same thing. So my plan ahead of time is to not even cover this thing up when we're done. Grab that other GoPro camera, attach it to the tripod, and set it up for a nice time lapse as I take the other camera that we're filming with now upstairs to do the editing. This thing will be working here, watching what's happening for us so we can check on it later, and even incorporate it into the video at the end so we can get a view of what happens in the worm bin after you close up shop, shut off the lights, and go away. Or at least what happens in mine. You might have also noticed my little board down here, which attempts to explain things visually, tries to sort of conceptualize something in the real world using a little bit of a simple illustration in order to convey some information. You're probably looking at this thing thinking, oh my goodness, what in the heck is all that? You know, but if you look at it for a moment, I think you'll know what it is. It's a diagram of my shelf, and the shelf has a bunch of containers on it. And you can see the illustration shows one container in the middle position on top. And in real life it's not there. It's because that's the container we're working on today. This container is in this arrangement here because the way I've got stuff set up, I go from oldest, swinging back and forth, doing like an S curve down to the youngest. So my youngest stuff is lowest off to this edge, and then swinging back this way, making this our second oldest container in service today. And all these numbers just indicate the age of the bin, as do the numbers here, but up on the top shelf, these containers have already progressed to a portion of their life cycle which is beyond the everyday, composting of household materials. It's the stage in which I'm already trying to drive the bins towards completion. And I know everyone does it a little bit differently, but what I've been doing a lot lately is just kind of running a bin up until a certain age or up until a certain capacity of the container, maybe just a number of feedings, whatever the reason is, to switch from everyday composting to a second phase, which I'm depicting here as the second number above. So in each case, this is the 128, 132, 134 was how long the bin was, according to my record keeping, in the composting stage. Now the second number that you see here, and you can see this one's already completed that second stage. These two are actually in that second stage right now. The second stage is what I consider foraging, allowing the worms time to just, work through the material, break this stuff all down, get it really nice and fine, so that at some point we could proceed towards harvesting the castings. And then, I guess just as a quick explanation here, on the oldest container, the one that's up there on the top left of the shelf, is already in the third stage, which in my book usually means migration of the worms out of the material, allowing time for that to occur. You can see that's already 24 days elapsed. Gradually working the worms out of the material, letting them do all the work, just moving out on their own. There's other options for separating the worms from the castings, but that's just my preferred way in most cases. So I'm going to be looking at it today from the point of view of, hey, you know what, if the oldest bin, which is already migrating, completed its foraging stage in 21 days, 3 weeks, then, today, on this bin's 21st day of foraging, is it not possible that it too could possibly, be upgraded to migration? I don't know. I guess we'll only know once we check the bin. And I really didn't want to sort of predestine what happens here, so I didn't come down with any food or anything. I resisted the temptation to try to steer it towards a particular outcome, but I am prepared, if we decide to do so today, to get this bin into migration mode other than just checking in. So I guess to recap what happened last time we were in here, we were just looking through the material, you know, checking out how nice it had been progressing over the past couple weeks since we had fed it last. And we did check the middle area, which is where that last feeding of the bin had occurred. But as we cleared off the top surface, like we're doing now, we had collected up all these large chunk materials, which tend to get a little bit dry since they're out on the top surface, and we set them aside so that later on we can get those materials sunken down below the surface of the material in the bin and get that dry stuff down into a place where it's surrounded with damp material, so it too can sort of benefit from being submerged and being mixed in with the bedding as opposed to just sitting out on the top surface. You know, if I were to opt to keep this thing covered with plastic, the whole thing would be really damp on this top surface as well, through and through. And I've done it that way in the past, but most recently I've been trying to stick to more paper cardboard coverings whenever possible, avoiding the plastic. So now the other thing we did last week was try to see if we can spot any of the old food that had been placed in here in the past, and some of that would be things that you almost certainly expect to find, such as the tough outer husk of a mango's seed. So in here, the seed that's inside this husk has already been nibbled away by the worms. I was probably the one to tear off the other half of the husk. But this is obviously something we wouldn't expect to see gone anytime soon. It's the sort of stuff that we would probably end up separating from the material somehow in the end. So this was all the stuff that was out on the surface last time, submerged for the past week. Just thinking that maybe if there's still residual worm action happening down here where the feedings had been getting administered, then those bits of stuff could benefit from that added worm traffic that's going on down in that section of the bin. But I think this bin did kind of get so disturbed and tilled up that any chance of old leftovers being specifically in the middle anymore seem a little bit unlikely. I'm sure by now the food scraps that might still be in this bin have been pretty much scattered about in all directions at this point. I don't know. I mean, I got to admit, I just want to come clean on the whole 21-day thing. I did sort of after the fact feel like I had maybe jumped the gun on the other bin when I decided at 21 days it was time to end foraging and get right into migrating the worms out of the material. And I've got so much stuff floating around in this bin. I look at other people's bins when they till through it at the end, and they don't have anything like that floating within their bin. So I think, much as I would like to get started into the migration of the worms out of this material and maybe separate all that stuff later using a screen or whatever, it'd be so much more satisfying to see it all break down. But I know that would take time, But I'm not in any particular rush, so I don't know. I would have to guess that if we kept coming in here on a weekly basis, it would still be a couple weeks before we'd see a lot of those large chunks of paper all gone. But I would think that as, the availability of other more scrumptious leftovers, like this little, what's left of a banana peel stem, continuously getting broken down, probably helps a lot when I kind of stick my thumbnail into it and break it apart, splinter it apart like that. It just probably gets much more access and gets broken down much more quickly. I don't know. I think I am going to withhold the urge to get this thing up out of foraging and into migration and let it just continue a little bit longer. Another thing that we kicked around last week was that all that stuff that we had collected, that dry stuff and put into the middle, might have been a little bit too dry, and maybe we should have sprayed it down with water. I mean, I think I was even saying it out loud in the video last time, and a couple people actually did respond to that commentary I made and did tend to agree that it probably would have helped. But, you know, I got to tell you, as I pour through this stuff, I'm not finding anything that's dry down here. Everything's got a nice dampness to it. So any of this stuff down here would have been the stuff I collected off the surface last week, would have gone in here completely dry. And I think it probably is best not to go adding moisture at this time, because I can feel there's just moisture everywhere in this bin, and it might not look that way. It might look a little dry from the camera's point of view. I can't tell, but just from handling it, I could tell that it's in good shape. So here I am, resisting the urge to maybe prematurely jump the gun on getting this thing migrating. I don't know, my only thought on maybe helping this thing get to the finish line a little quicker is still along the same lines of moisture related considerations, and it just sort of keeps driving me back to possibly using plastic again to drape over the whole container so that even the top surface doesn't have to go through that whole process of drying out and becoming less and less hospitable for the worms to occupy. Maybe the better bet here would be to just swap out all those paper and cardboard coverings just for some plastic. Perhaps do it in such a way that I'm allowing for a good amount of ventilation around the outer edges of the bin, covering only the center area. And then all this stuff out here would get nice and damp. And it would certainly get a lot more worm traffic, so anything like this could potentially become a lot more interesting for a worm if it were just sitting there getting the condensation off the plastic dripping down or soaking down into it. You know what? Before we close up shop here, let's just give a quick examination of the outer edges of the bin too. It's just something I've been doing lately, I don't know, and it just feels like the right thing to do. Whoa. That is always so strange. For whatever reason, in this bin, I always somehow stumble on something that looks like that, you know, kind of like a little jumble of worms that appear to be hanging out in one particular spot for no particular reason. It's so weird, and they were just hanging out down there in the corner. I wonder if that's going to be the same thing in the other corners. They definitely seem to be much more interested in these outer reaches of the bin than right down the middle where we had placed all of the collected stuff off the top of the surface. So I guess that stuff from the top of the surface wasn't even really material that the worms are all that interested in. They seem to be just interested in other sections of the bin for whatever reason. It's kind of an interesting revelation. I was kind of wondering, where are all the worms? And they're, you know, just doing their thing. I'm wondering what the heck it is here that's so interesting to them. There's got to be something in there. Or is it just the mass of worms itself that tends to attract other worms to come over and just see what's going on? I don't know. To me, that just seems so interesting. Because every time I peel one of those apart and try to examine, you know, if there's something possibly within it that's causing the mobbing, I never find anything. I always just, you know, pick through it, and it kind of squirms apart on its own. Even if you don't pick it apart, it'll fall apart out here in the light. Because yeah, these worms are a little bit sensitive to the bright lights overhead, especially if I lift it up closer like I did to get it in front of the camera. It gets it that much closer to the light. Must be driving these poor little guys crazy. So we don't want to drive these little guys crazy. Let's get this done. So I'm going to do a quick inspection of this side as well, and then we'll call it a day in here, and we'll just let this process continue. But I believe I am going to swap out paper, cardboard coverings for some sort of a plastic, but that'll occur later because, like I said earlier, we're going to be firing up this GoPro. There's another jumble of worms right there in the corner. Wow, that's pretty cool. These little guys, so many of them. It's like having a candy bar in your hand that moves. The guys on the outside obviously don't like this sensation of being out in the bright light. Gosh, I just feel like tearing it apart to see what the heck is inside of it. It's got some good weight to it, too. Alright, let's put these little guys down. Stop torturing them. But, you know, like I was about to say, we're going to set this thing up, peer down into the bin, observe what's happening via time-lapse. So every few seconds it'll take one single image, and when it stitches all of those images together and plays them back quickly at 30 frames per second in video, we'll be able to sort of see that slow-moving action of the top of the bin's surface played back over a fairly short period of time, allowing us to see exactly what all happened out here after we closed up shop and left the worms alone. I guess I'll also probably dim out the lights a little bit, because I believe the camera is able to compensate for the low light by just increasing the exposure time, and that shouldn't really affect the quality of the image. Maybe I'll just leave one little dim light on overhead to give us a little view of what goes on here after a person is done disrupting the worms. And just to recap, or maybe I didn't even mention it, this worm species that inhabits this bin is kind of a mix. This is my mixed tub of worms, and it was sent to me by another vermicomposter in exchange for a sampling of some of my red wigglers. I received these in its place, and these are supposedly the Uncle Jim's Worm Farm composting mix, red worm mix, and it's kind of a combination of red wigglers, European night crawlers, and what I think predominantly lives in this bin, which is the Indian blue worms. And this is the only bin that I really got that's officially got Indian blue worms in it. And it's the only bin that I really see this crazy climbing behavior in. So I think, even though somebody made a good suggestion, was maybe doing an after maintenance time-lapse video of multiple bins to be able to give us a similar view of how other breeds or other species of worm react to this sort of handling, might be telling. So that's a cool idea. I might actually follow through with that. But for today, we're pretty much done. Like I said, I'll take care of covering this up later after the time lapse. And I got a few things to clean up here and whatever before I can switch to the other camera. But before I go, let me really quickly say, stick around for the time lapse. But before I sign off, I'd just like to say thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. And coming right up, we're going to watch the time lapse of this bin for the next few hours and see what kind of activity happens in here. Should be interesting. All right, everyone, have a great day. Take care.